Views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of the staff, management, advertisers, or ownership of News Radio 1150 KSAL. Good afternoon. It's time once again for KSAL's Friendly Fire. I'm Clark Sanders.
And I'm Nancy Hodges.
And in studio with us, Salina City Manager Jason Gage. Welcome, Jason.
Hey, thank you.
Always glad to have you.
Jason is here. Whenever Jason comes by, he addresses a variety of issues, but our focus today is going to be on the upcoming vote to increase the Salina sales tax. So let's first of all, Jason, go through the nuts and bolts. When it's going to be a mail-in ballot, when will the ballots be in the mail, and when will they have to be back in order for your ballot to count?
Okay, good questions. First of all, the Saline County Clerk's Office is responsible for the elections. That doesn't change, so people need to know that. And they are intending to have the ballots out on April 20th, so hopefully people will have those the 20th, maybe the 21st, depends on mail a little bit. And they'll have until the clerk's office needs to have those in their hand by May 10th. So May 10th is the last day.
And will there be an envelope included in your ballot to send it back?
I think so. They'll use the same approach they used before.
Yeah,
I believe
think there is
that's
one.
the case.
Okay, but if you fiddle and fool around and it gets to be May 9th and you want to make sure your vote counts, and certainly if it gets to be May 10th, then you just need to carry it down.
Walk it down.
Right, walk it down, they'll take it.
Okay, all right,
Yep.
Very good. Now, one question and one question only on the ballot. And what is the question?
Well, the basic question will be asking voters to replace the current 0.4 cent sales tax. That's a special sales tax with a 0.75% sales tax. And it'll be specifically for certain uses, and they'll be in the language. But generally speaking, those include neighborhood streets, property tax stabilization, parks, quality jobs, and then there's some kind of generic stuff, debt for major projects, things like that. But those are the big items, and those will all be in the language, so people will be able to see those criteria in the language.
So is this a rather lengthy ballot then, relative to just one question?
It's a little bit. I think those items are going to be shown probably in a bullet point list, so they should be pretty easy to understand. That's my understanding is how they'll be shown.
Is that jobs for that Echo Devo committee? Are their activities, or when you including jobs in that list, is that going out recruiting, or what does that involve?
The new economic development organization that's been formed with the partners of the city, the county, the chamber, and the airport authority is funded already. So
okay.
we're not intending to use these monies to actually fund the entity, but what will happen is that once they hire their staff and hopefully find their stride, they'll be getting attention to Salina hopefully for good jobs, and that's our point, is try to see what we can do to complement to the degree that we need to job growth, both with current employers, which is really your biggest emphasis, and also with bringing employment to our community. And their emphasis will be what we call quality jobs and premier jobs. But what the money would likely be spent for is if there's a need for things like infrastructure, roads, drainage, maybe things like that. We are pretty good shape with utility money if water or sewer extensions need to be made. But those things, there could be things like property and building. Our intent is to keep the dollars with things where we can that stay with Salina. So we've never been a city that said, let's just write you a $3 or $4 million check and hope that you keep jobs here. We don't do that. Some cities do that.
Yeah.
We've never done that, but we know that we can be more aggressive in some ways, but we want to keep it with those assets of our community. So, you know what, if they're here for a year or two and they close, it's a bad thing, but we still have maybe a building, land,
access and stuff like that.
Access, and we can use that market and try to fill it again. So that's how we want to use it.
If this passes, how long will it be in effect?
20 years is the term. That there is a sunset, and it's 20 years.
Okay. And then what would be the overall impact? So taxes would go up 1/3 cent? Is that?
Well, yeah, it's 0.4 to 0.35, but that's just one piece of the total sales tax. Our total sales tax today in our community is 8.4%. Of that, 6.5 is the state of Kansas sales tax. And a lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah.
So that leaves 1.9, and 1% is for Saline County, which also there's a distribution formula to come back to the city for some. And the city has two small incremental taxes that add up to 0.9. And so we're focusing on the 0.4 going to 0.75. But the short of it is, and the simple of it is that if it is approved, the total sales tax would go from 8.4 to 8.75.
Now, but the 0.4, isn't that, if this does not pass, will the 0.4 sunset?
It will sunset. It's currently scheduled to sunset in very early 2019. So there's a little bit of time in there, but that's when it would sunset.
Okay. Right. Now, Jason, I hope you have committed these to memory, but where do we rank in cities and counties in the state of Kansas as far as taxes, property tax, those kinds of things that this will impact?
We put together some what we call sort of competing communities and comparable communities. There's a lot of ways of looking at it. So it's not all of them, but what we looked at, for example, sales tax today, we're at 8.4. Wichita is pretty low. Wichita is at 7.4, and a lot of the suburbs around Wichita stay low because of that. Interestingly enough, we found that the city of Wichita does not have a city sales tax. The 7.4 is the state and Sedgwick County. So we found that very interesting.
Yeah.
And, but as you look beyond that, Garden City is 8.65, Manhattan is 8.75, Hayes is 8.75, McPherson is 9. Hutchinson is 9.1, Abilene is 9.1, both Dodge City and Topeka are 9.15, and Junction City is 9.75. So those are all fairly comparable towns around us. From a property tax perspective, we look at it in mills.
Right.
And Hayes, when we looked at the comparable group, they're at 25.007 mills. Salina is next at 27.08 mills. And these are 2015 numbers. Garden City is almost 32 mills. Wichita is about 32, a little higher. Topeka is pushing 40. Hutchinson is just a bit over 43. Manhattan is almost 44. Abilene is about 45 and a half. Junction City is about 47 and a half, and then Dodge City is almost 51, and McPherson's around 51. So
we're doing good.
Yeah, and what I tell people though is that there's no race to see who can have the highest tax rate.
Oh no! It just gives you a picture of what's out there.
It does, and the way we're looking at it is we're thinking about how do we see Salina in the next 20 years, and what do we need to do? What's our part of making this a vibrant community in our region in the next 20 years? And of course, the school district deals with education. We have our colleges, and they deal with that, and they're doing a good job.
You bet.
So we have these other pieces, but our piece is mostly going to be infrastructure.
How was the figure 0.75 arrived at? Why not 1? Why not 0.5? Why 0.75?
When we were talking about it with the governing body, we kind of gave them various increments and what that would add up to, and that's really where they ended up with their consensus.
And what would that add up to? How much money would that generate in like, say, calendar year? Well, when would this start, first of all, if it passed?
Well, the state has a kind of nice formula of using quarters, and we think we'd likely start to see collections in the probably the last quarter of this year.
All right, so we'd start seeing an impact in 2017.
I think so. Yeah.
So what would be the projection for how much additional revenue would this raise for 2017?
Well, I'll work it back the other way. Probably somewhere around $1 million, because the difference between the where we're at 8.4 and 8.75, we estimate in 2017 dollars, that's about $4.3 million. So if we get 1/4 of that roughly in this year, probably around $1 million for the end of this year.
Okay, for the end of this year. Mm-hmm. Then what about years down the road?
Well, it depends on if it grows. Typically, our sales tax will grow anywhere from about, on average, 1.5%, 2%, 2.5% to 3%. We usually don't see growth too many years more than 3%. It's, for the most part, probably falls in line with cost of living.
What's the impact if this doesn't pass?
Well, that's a good question. As I mentioned, we will be able to utilize the current sales tax through 2019. And so between then and now, if it doesn't pass, I think the first thing we do is we have to look at it and say, is it a big margin or is it a small margin? If it's a big margin, you have some major decisions to make. If it's a really small margin, then it's harder to identify what the issue is, but you try to do that. And so the question is, do you go back in the next 2.5 years with something else? Maybe. We haven't decided that, so we don't know.
Sure.
some places would say, well, you raise property taxes, but we don't like to do that, and the state doesn't like you to anymore.
Right.
I don't see that would be an option regardless of whatever the state does. So we just, in Salina, just don't like to do that. So I think you're really looking at, if you can't lock in some form of sales tax, you're probably looking at cutting back. And then they would have to decide. I wouldn't automatically say, well, we're cutting back the current street work or this or that. I think we'd have to go through some major priorities, but probably close to $3 million would have to be cut back. Some of the current sales tax, for example, goes to things that'll be paid off, and Kenwood Cove is the biggest example of that. So we don't need that beyond 2019. But if we look at the annual street work, about 1.6 or 7 million, replacement of equipment we use for maintenance of streets and other things, and some of those types of capital needs, that's probably close to 3.
Are the projects prioritized?
No, they're not. We really went through, we decided, we asked ourselves, how do we want to look at this? You do sometimes see communities say, for the next 20 years, these are all the projects. Well, the problem is that if you ask me, I wish I had a great crystal ball. I can tell you what I think we need, but sometimes things come up, and over a 20-year period, that's a lot. And then trying to put cost estimates on that is almost impossible, and you're going to be wrong. What will happen is in about year 15, someone's going to say, well, this project's supposed to be done now, and then you look back and you found, well, the cost growth was more than we thought before. We don't have as many funds. We might not be able to do these last few projects, and that becomes an issue. So rather than do that, we decided to focus on the core topics, and streets is the main one. And they did commit. The governing body has committed and said, we will spend at least $2 million more on streets than we spend today if this passes.
Well, that's good, because they really need it, honestly.
And that's about 40% of the tax. And quite honestly, when you think of the streets, and we're really talking about neighborhood streets, we've done a pretty good job with our main streets, but we haven't been able to get to the neighborhood streets, and we need to do that. And so we know there's a big need really across our community. That's what they want to do. So that'll be at least that. That would put the sales tax contribution to streets upwards of around $3.6 to $3.7 million per year just from sales tax if that happens. And there will be some pretty quick improvements from that.
How much of this would go to the river project?
The river project, what we said, and we haven't gone back and said we have a definite final scope of what river renewal would be. And I'll come back to that. But one of the things that I think a lot of people were concerned about is they envisioned this large 6 or 7 mile concrete basin with water flowing through it. And that's not the case. There was historically, and there probably will be some conversation about in the downtown area where you're trying to mix with good things going on, having a place for people to hang out. But
hardscape.
That's just a few hundred feet probably. Overall, what you're really talking about is getting sediment out, keeping sediment out. Right. You're going to reshape, after you get it cleaned out, you're going to reshape the channels. You're going to have a lot of riprap, which is we call it riprap. It's that rock you see along the edges, grassy edges, things like that. And it's going to be a natural stream for really 90-some% of that distance. But when we look at the cost, what we've said is we'll need to go back and talk about the scope and what the priorities really are and what's affordable. We'll also need to see what can we leverage from federal or state grants and private dollars. But what we've said is that we would not we would commit to not contributing more than the current increment for Kenwood Cove. That's about $1.3 million roughly per year. That would be the maximum, the total maximum. We want to be less than that. But it's in essence saying we could probably substitute that and bring that in and be able to deal with the river as well as some of the bigger needs in our community and balance that out.
What would it take in terms of dollars to get the silt out and to get a flow going again?
We don't have an exact number, but one of the problems is if you go back 30 years from now, 20, 30 years ago, you could basically stop the water flow, which we could do today, dry it out, throw your equipment in, and start moving dirt out, and it seems simple. Well, today, the federal government says, no, it's not that simple. You have to go through the Corps of Engineers. You have to get a special permit. And then we're going to look at protecting certain protected species and what you do with that. And if you find those there after you look at that, you either have to go around them, which probably doesn't fit in your project, or you have to create another habitat for them somewhere else. It's very expensive. So we think when we really talk about getting the silt out, keeping it out, because keeping it out, you want to do
You got to build a silt pond.
Silt ponds,
some form of a desiltation type approach, and then you go through all the other. You're into it a few million just to do that. So
absolutely.
part of it is to really say, okay, if we're going to have, at some point, we are going to have to spend some significant dollars on it. You can't fill it in, because if you do, you just took away drainage for probably at least half to 2/3 of the town.
Messes with your flood.
Right.
So when it rains,
So the thought is can we do something that's reasonable, that meets most people's expectations, and if we're going to spend a lot of dollars anyway, make it something we're somewhat proud of, and we say, hey, it doesn't have to be San Antonio, it doesn't even have to be Oklahoma City, but it can be a nice natural river asset to our community that still deals with drainage, gives us a place to hang out, and really just walk along it, walk along the path and enjoy nature.
823 KSAL, Friendly Fire is back. City Manager Jason Gage is our special guest this afternoon, and we're talking about the proposed sales tax increase. It'll be a mail-in ballot. You should have your ballot about the 20th. About a week from yesterday, we think, and you will have until May 10th to either mail that back or get that back. Not postmarked by May 10th. It's got to be in the county clerk's office by May 10th.
Now, is that just for Salinas City citizens?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Okay, so even though it's the county clerk's, because the county clerk is the chief election officer for
that's correct.
both the city and the county. 823-9596, KSAL toll free, 1-800-608-1150, star 1150, a free cellular call if you have a U.S. cellular device. There is a group advocating for this project. Is there any group actively advocating against it?
I'm not aware of any formal group advocating against it, and I haven't seen any signs, so I'd have to say I don't think so.
Okay. Do you have any kind of sense of how this is going to go? Is it going to be close? Is it going to be a blowout in your favor, or what do you think?
Well, I learned a long time ago I'm not very good at predicting elections, so I really don't know.
It's a lose-lose.
You always hope it goes well, but I think when we think about a tax, there's not a good tax, and we think the sales tax is if there's a fair tax, that's probably it, and at least you don't have to pay over and over again on the same thing. And property taxes just aren't popular for those reasons. So that's kind of good. We can spread it out. About a third roughly could come from outside our community. That's nice. The impact is fairly insignificant. Of course, the more you spend, the more impact you have. But so we think that's a factor. But it all comes down to, I think, is what we're offering. Does it match up with what the community wants and sees for themselves over the next 20 years? And if not, we'll know about it. And if it does match up, we'll get a good vote.
So then you have a sense that maybe more than the dollars and cents we're talking about, it's what the money will be used for that's the real issue.
I think that's a big part of it. Anytime you go up with an increment, there's a little risk there. And big projects, as we know, are always a risk as well. So those are factors. But I think if I always tell people, I say, you can't solve everyone's issues or take care of all their needs, but quite honestly, as a city government, we're kind of expected to try. And when we looked at this, we really said, what are the needs that we hear the most? And neighborhood streets over and over and over again.
That's
quality jobs, not low-wage jobs, better wage jobs and benefits, and trying to be more strategic with that. And this will help complement that, where people are really proud of our park system and keeping it, preserving it, and then enhancing it. Those are really, really big things. And the other thing is keeping the property tax down. And we talk about that stabilization, and what that really means is that if we have the sales tax to fund our big capital needs, it takes pressure off of the property tax in the general fund. In the long term, that helps us keep that property tax low.
Yeah, because I think that's really an unpopular place to add taxes. Is property
absolutely.
tax. Yeah.
We just really...
Everybody kind of screams about that. Well, now, Jason, I fussed with you, I think in a friendly way, but I know the recession, you probably had people in the park department, and the ones that are there, don't misunderstand, I think they're doing great. Mm-hmm. But I think our parks are looking a little shabby. And I'll tell you, this is an anecdotal story, but I took my great-grandson to Oxbow Park, and he, of course, had to go to the bathroom. So I took him in the girls' bathroom, and, of course, he wanted to sit and visit for a long time. And it was all clean and paper, and everything was good, but the walls were kind of moldy looking. And he looked over, and he said, Nene, why is that dirty there? And I said, well, it isn't really dirty. It's just kind of been wet. I didn't know if that's what it was. So he said, well, they should paint that. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, he's 4. And I said, well, I will speak with someone about that. So I called Bob.
I'll get right on that.
Well, I did. I called Monday, and he was real nice. He said, well, now, it was a toilet paper. Yeah, it was really clean and sparkling. That's not the issue. The floor was clean. But he said, he was going to take a look at it and did. But my point is, during the recession, I understand, because times were tough and we didn't fill maybe positions or whatever. But it really needs some upgrading now, I think, at parks too. Really.
Yeah, I think they do. There's really no excuse for that. We should have painted that, but sometimes.
Well, that's what he said, and he just hadn't had any complaints, I think.
No, and sometimes you have so many locations, something falls off the list.
Bet.
But I agree. Our lighting systems, a lot of them are about 30 years old or more, and they don't meet the current standards. We'll see electrical issues where they're not reliable, so we have to replace them. They're very expensive, and but they're a big part of what people like in our town about having the field for their kids to play on and having tournaments and bringing people to town. So there's a lot of those issues that we have. And our park system is really good. And when you go from community to community, we have really good ball fields, really good facilities, and we want to keep them up, keep them nice, keep them as perfect as we can. And then along the way, if somebody says, a group of or community says, hey, here's an enhancement, here's something that we'd like to do that we think is beneficial for everyone in town, it gives us an opportunity to address it.
Well, like the dog park.
Yeah.
New dog park.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Where are we at on that?
The dog park, they're getting ready. They were approved for the location out there at East Crawford, and I believe they have materials on order, so it won't be too far out. You'll start to see movement out there, fence and things like that. There's not a whole lot to it, really. Maybe
it's
more
pretty.
Dogs probably, too, out there.
More dogs and more dog poop mitts and things like that.
Yep.
All the necessities. But no, it's not a really expensive. I mean, with the fencing and obviously the stuff that it takes, but after that, it's not real high maintenance.
No, and that project's a result of private donations, and that's quite honestly, people really give to help us with caring for the animals. It's an awesome thing in Salina how people give for things like that, and so we're able to do that because of the giving.
Okay, well, anyway, I do think I'm looking forward to the park improvement too.
Seeing a lot of dirt moving on 5th relative to the field house. Where are we at on that?
Yeah, the field house, they're finishing up design. We'll be bidding here really pretty soon. And then, of course, once we get the bids in, we'll know where we stand on the price. We're at the same time, one of the things we said some time ago when we had concerns about the cost estimates, of course, one thing we did is we went to a competitive sealed bid process so we can try to get the best cost because the opinions on the costs were too broad. So we said that's the only way to really know. So we did that. And at the same time, we're trying to find other revenues. And so the commissioners have taken some actions leading to new market tax credits. And if we get those, and at this point, everything looks pretty positive, if we get those, we will, wherever that ends up, we'll be able to cover that project. And that's a big deal for us.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And that'll keep the taxpayers' portion at not more than $4.5 million, which is where we started.
Which is the original,
So, and we think there's a pretty good chance. So far, things are really falling in line with that.
Has there been any movement on this petition? And, of course, the petition, as we come to find out sort of after the fact, wouldn't ever really stop this.
That's correct. Yeah, what probably people don't understand is that the city's original $4.5 million is already built in, and then they have the private sector who, again, people giving in Salina came up with $4.5 in commitments, and they'll have to bridge that and make that happen in time. That's part of it, and they've committed, and we're excited about that. But it's when we started talking about could it be more than that, and the estimates coming in, early estimates, we're saying, well, anywhere from, really upwards of 12, 13, 14 million.
11 to 14, yeah.
And then back down to about 11 and a half, somewhere in there. So that's why we decided we'll just go to a sealed bid and get rid of that altogether and see where it ends up. But so that's really where we're at with that. We'll have to see. So we're kind of on the waiting at this point.
Do you have any idea when those bids might be accepted and when they'll be opened?
Yeah, the bidding will be happening in May, and we'll have, of course, there's a time frame once the design's finished, and that's just about any time. I don't have the date in front of me, but we're getting very close. That we'll solicit, which means the plans will be done. We'll solicit the bidders. I'm sure they'll have a pre-bid conference, get all that out, give the bidders usually 3 or 4 weeks. It's a pretty good-sized project, so I have to look at the time frame, but probably about 4 weeks to get the bids back in. Once we get them, we'll have to see how many we have and how many differences there are. Hopefully within 1 to 2 weeks after we get them in, we'll be able to award, and it depends again on complexities in there. And then once we award, it's about mobilization of the contractor, bringing them in, giving them notice to proceed, getting the dirt turned, and starting to do some work.
So what's happening, without lacking a plan, what's happening now?
With regards to the field house?
Yeah.
Well, they're finishing up design right now. So,
but there's work. I mean, I see
utility work.
Yeah,
okay.
utilities.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We some time ago we looked at that and we said, well, first of all, the utilities go right through the middle of the site. And
I remember that.
And you've got a pretty old water line there, and so what we indicated, we don't like utilities under a big building, and sewer you can sometimes deal with, even though it's hard to get to. But water, you don't want to have a water leak underneath your building. That's a really, really bad thing. So those are being relocated, and then part of what that will do, that will give better fire protection to the downtown, because that was a pretty old water line. So that's what people are seeing right now.
Yeah, that's what's happening now. I knew that.
And that's on time. That'll be done in time. They've had good weather to work, and so that'll be done.
That's a great time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What can you tell us on Iron headed east?
I want to see it finished. I was glad to see the iron between Front Street and Ohio done, and that's turned out really, really nice.
Oh, yeah, it looks great.
Out east, that's not going to take them too long to finish out there. They're pretty close with the concrete on the main project, and then they went all the way up to take the little hills out of the last year's project with the microsurfacing. So that's all going to happen here in a few short weeks. They'll be done.
All right.
Good.
823-9596.
Not too soon.
No. KSAL toll free 1-800-608-1150. Star 1150, a free cellular call if you have a U.S. cellular device. City Manager Jason Gage, our guest today on KSAL's KSAL. Friendly Fire is back. Jason Gage, our special guest this afternoon. 823-9596, KSAL toll-free, 1-800-608-1150. Star 1150, a free cellular call if you want to talk to Jason. Elizabeth in Salina, your turn on KSAL's Friendly Fire.
Yeah, I was just wondering, why do we still have brick streets on Lake Phillip and parts of Iron, I think?
I'm sorry, what did you say, Elizabeth? I couldn't understand you.
I said, why do we still have brick streets, like on Phillip?
Oh, why do we have brick streets?
Right. Are they protected by the Historical Society?
Yeah. No, brick streets, it's kind of funny. It depends what neighborhood you go into. Some people really like their brick streets, and some people don't. So we've taken some of them out where the neighborhood was fine with it. It's a lower cost to take them out if we need to reconstruct. It's because it's faster to go with another material. However, if you do a brick street right, it'll actually outlast the other streets, but it's a pretty high cost up front. So we've kind of done it both ways.
Well, some of those brick streets they'll jerk your guts around. It's like being in a salt shaker.
Yeah, I think it's what they're saying, Elizabeth, is it's mainly up to the folks in the neighborhood. Hey, thanks for your call.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Ernie in Salina, your turn on KSAL's Friendly Fire.
Yeah, I have a question for Jason.
Hi, Ernie.
We walked down Iron here, where they just finished it. And I noticed in one house there, they narrowed the sidewalks to 4 feet instead of 5 like the rest of it because somebody's got bushes planted there. Now, why would they do that?
That's a good question. I didn't realize we had a small area there with just 4 feet. So that's news to me.
It's right here in the 600 block, out in the middle there. It's a big, nice house, but they got a lot of bushes.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And they narrowed the sidewalk there, and you can't hardly even walk by it.
Huh. Well, yeah, I'll have to ask Ernie. I wasn't aware of that, and I don't know, so I'll be happy to ask them.
I didn't either until we walked around that way.
All right. Thanks, Ernie.
Thanks, Ernie.
Jason will look into that. Police department. We've had Chief Brad on before, and I know he's had some frustrations in that there are positions that are funded that he hasn't been able to fill. Mm-hmm. Where are we at relative to filling out our full complement of funded police staff?
Yeah, they're working hard. We have them fully funded. That's not a question. Quite honestly, right now, when you have a good economy, it's really difficult to fill certain positions, and police officer is one of those because it's a difficult job.
Now, as I understand, it's 85 is what we could afford. 85.
I think that's right.
And we got about, 80 or so?
We're about 10 short right now.
Oh, so we're 75.
Yeah.
Because it started out 20 below, so they're doing better.
So, yeah, they're doing better. They're constantly recruiting, and we want to get up to that number. But then you'll have retirements, and that happens. We got the baby boomer bug going, and that's part of it as well. And then sometimes you try to do your best, but sometimes someone will want to try that work, but it is different, and sometimes it can be confrontational.
Plus, it's you can't just walk in off the street and interview and get that job either.
No, and you don't have to have prior training or education, but it's helpful. And we know today we'll send you the training. You're going to go to the training academy. There's no question about that.
And the city will pay for that?
Yeah, it's the way that works is the state actually pays for that in Kansas. And in some places, other cities have to. But you'll get to go there and learn. So it's just it's tough to do it, but they're working really hard, and we're supporting them to do that.
What about our firefighters?
Firefighters do better. We don't see the number of applicants we did before a few years ago, but and we are getting retirements, the same thing. We have the baby boomer bug, but they don't have as much of an issue recruiting. And I imagine because that job, while it has its dangers, and it certainly does, and its pressures, it's not as confrontational.
Right,
and the hours are a little different. You get 24 on, 48 off. That's a little different, and you don't get called in for court and things like that.
It seems like, and I don't know, this is just a perception maybe, but there's been more fires of late, it seems.
Lately, yeah, there have. It seems like in just the last few weeks.
That wind, I think, and the dryness have made it hard for everything. By the way, I love the new, the remodeled fire station number 1. That's really nifty looking. And you've got that big bay on the west.
It's that, yeah, we didn't reconstruct. We added on to it. That was the last primary phase of the building. And the thought is we did a study many years ago and said, where does that need to be in the future? There was thoughts about location. And what we found is it needed to be right where it's at. So we said, let's make it for the next 50 years. So we renovated it inside. We added those bays. That actually is part of why our what we call our insurance services organization, or ISO rating, has gone down from a 3 to a 2 to put us in a pretty elite class. Is because of how we can equip that particular station based on the business and location.
Oh, that's great.
All right.
Well, with the new stuff downtown, that might make a difference, too.
Absolutely.
Be looking in your mailbox for your ballot. It should show up about a week or so from now. If it gets to be, say, the 25th or so, and you don't have a ballot, what should you do?
I would call the county clerk's office. That's what I would do. If you don't have a ballot, call the county clerk's office.
Yep. And make sure that you vote, and make sure that you get it returned by May the 10th. You'll have the ability to mail it back. Or if you procrastinate and don't get it in the mail in time, then you can take it down. But just make sure that it's in by May 10th. Jason Gage, City Manager, thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you.
Always good to see you.
Good to see you.
I just say so long.